Donald Trump booed during his speech at the Libertarian National Convention over the weekend.
The Libertarian Party should nominate Trump for President of the United States. Whoa. That's nice. Only do that if you want to win. If you want to lose, don't do that. Keep getting your 3% every 4 years.
You hear it there. The former president heckled, jeered at multiple times during his roughly 34-minute speech. It's one of his shortest campaign speeches to date. It is highly unusual for a presumptive Republican nominee to attend the Libertarian Convention, and it highlights the Trump campaign's growing concern over third-party candidates. Joining us now, Republican strategist Rina Shah, Lance Trover, former spokesperson for Doug Burgum's 2024 presidential campaign, and former special assistant to President Biden, Meghan Hayes. Good morning, everybody. Here we all are on a nice Memorial Day. Lance, let's just start first with you. Rina and I were talking last hour about seeing the former president at that Libertarian Convention. Why do you think he was there, and what does it say to you that he was there?
I think this is part of a broader strategy they have going in reaching out to non-traditional Republican groups. And I would say to Democrats and anybody who questions that, underestimate Donald Trump at your own peril when it comes to reaching out to these groups. We've seen that he is polling really well with Latinos, African Americans across the country. And despite the raucous atmosphere, I would say that, he made some pretty big commitments to this group of people out there today. This commutation of Ross Ulbricht, which is a big deal to them. That's going to filter down through the atmosphere. It is a little unconventional, but again, I've not seen a Republican candidate like Donald Trump in many years doing this kind of outreach to non-traditional Republican groups.
So it sounds like you're saying it comes from a place of offense, not defense.
Yeah, well, look, I don't think anybody, the Biden campaign or the Trump campaign, believes that this is going to be some blowout election. Everybody knows that each vote is going to count. And so I say, hey, why not go to this convention? Make your case to these folks. Granted, the reaction may not have been exactly what he had hoped for, but in terms of the long term and the outreach, where are the Libertarians going to go? Are they going to go with Joe Biden, or are they going to go with somebody like Donald Trump?
And Rina, I want to listen to some clips of him talking about them going kind of back and forth at each other. Let's listen to this.
With the lockdowns, the mask mandates, the travel restrictions, President Trump presided over the greatest restriction on individual liberties this country has ever known.
RFK Jr., I call him Junior. By the way, he's radical left. Don't think about it. Don't waste your vote. We need a conservative person with common sense.
He's saying it directly there. He's trying to educate them, it seems like, in a way. Listen, he's this, he's not that.
I mean, typical campaign tactic, right? It was, to me, the type of thing that was more revealing of who RFK Jr. actually is. And he's somebody that took a real issue, again, with those COVID-era policies. And it was probably the most salient point he's made in a while on the campaign trail, because that is something that a lot of people have tend to forget. Overall, is the poor handling of the Trump administration, how they handle that pandemic. I always say, Trump lied, people died. And if we forget that, then we forget the greatest mistake he's made in his presidency and why he doesn't deserve to re-enter the White House. His administration knew of so many things coming down the pike, yet they failed to act. And then they wanted to take advantage of basically the environment and say, we did Operation Warp Speed. Hey, that was the bare minimum. So again, I think if we focus on COVID, people realize that Trump did things that don't jive with libertarians. And I think that will also trickle down and make its way to libertarians. But the question remains, where do they go? I think a lot of libertarians stay home. And look, it's not unusual for them to interface with conservatives. I've attended places like Freedom Fest for summers, many years, where I've seen conservatives and libertarians coexist well. But this, again, was a poor move on Trump's part. I think trying to court their vote, it fell flat.
And Meghan, in terms of the Biden campaign, they're also trying to guard against Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in their own way, which is what's kind of unique about him as a candidate.
Yeah, I just think that the Biden campaign is doing this a little bit more strategically, and I think that they are going after votes on the issues, which is, and drawing the contrast to Trump and to RFK. But again, I don't think the Biden campaign is taking RFK very seriously. I disagree a little bit with you guys on why he was there. I think he doesn't have money, and he can't afford to do his big rallies. He is showing up where cameras are, and this is the way to do it. And he gets attention. We're out here talking about it, regardless if it's good or bad. We're talking about it. So he's getting the attention that he needs, and wants.
Right. And Lance, he knew he was going to go into a rocket, as you described it, and it was a rocket
It certainly seemed that way,
environment.
yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, it had been that way the night before, too, when Vivek Ramaswamy was there talking about him. And I talked to one analyst that was saying, look, it was a chance for him to show, like, see, I can go, toe-to-toe, even if they're pushing back on me or belittling me. What do you think about that?
I think that this is Donald Trump and this is what he does. And I think that is something people actually like about him, is that he is not afraid to throw himself into the lion's den and be a fighter. But again, if you look at what they're doing, whether it's in the Bronx last week or going to these types of things, I do think there is some strategy behind what they're doing in terms of reaching out to non-traditionally Republican groups out there, because this is obviously going to be a very close election, and they know that every vote's going to count.
Yeah, and so Meghan, how does the Biden campaign then move forward while he's reaching out to, kind of like you mentioned, he did the Bronx, he did this thing this weekend. Biden campaign's obviously going after Haley voters. They are looking outside of their normal base, because this is likely going to be won on the margins in some of these swing states.
Yeah, I think that the Biden campaign is meeting voters where they are. They're going to the suburbs of Philadelphia. They are going into Arizona. They are reaching people where they are. They're talking about issues that those folks care about, which the women outside of the suburbs of Philadelphia, they care about reproductive freedom. Donald Trump's not mentioning that because he knows it's a losing issue for him. So I think that they're going on the policy and trying to draw the contrast of who Joe Biden is versus Donald Trump.
And it is going to be interesting, too, because now we're almost a month. Let's see exactly. It's May 27th. We're exactly a month away from this debate, Rina, where they're going to be on stage together. Again, neither of them have debated since this last go-round. So it's going to be interesting to see this all kind of come to a head pretty soon.
Well, I'll be very interested to know who's watching, because this also feels like a moment in which people say, again? And what are they going to hear that's different? When you talk about Trump showing up in different places, looking like a fighter, what's he fighting for anymore? I don't hear it. Young families like mine with really tiny children, we have a lot of big, unexpected costs coming down the pike, always. But it feels magnified when you don't hear a candidate that once your vote says, I'll make your life better. But how exactly? What are you going to do with wars? What are you going to do on the economy? What are you even going to do to strengthen the American family? We don't hear the Republican Party put out really clear issues anymore, like those pet issues I heard Doug Burgum talk about. He really piqued my interest when he was on the debate stage, because when candidates talk in specifics, people listen. And Trump doesn't do it, ever. He's always speaking in platitudes, and I think that's my great frustration, is that what are you fighting for? You're out here just fighting, and you're angry, but you're not fighting for my family when you don't talk about my needs. And that is going to be the challenge in the debates. When Biden says to him, I did this, that, or the other, whether it's junk fees or what have you, at least he's got some concrete things. That's what Trump world needs to focus on now.
Okay, let's leave it there for now, but you'll still be here. We have more to discuss coming up. But